The rain hammered against Madeline's windshield like bullets as another contraction ripped through her body. She gripped the steering wheel, counting the seconds until the pain passed. 8 minutes apart now. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Thunder crashed overhead as she pulled into the driveway of the house she had called home for 3 years. The house Julian had promised would always be her safe haven. The warm glow from the living room window should have been welcoming, but something felt wrong. She could see two figures sitting calmly on the couch, Julian and his mother Dorothy. Madeline fumbled for her keys with shaking hands, another contraction building in her lower back. She had been at her sister's house when labor started, and the 40-minute drive home through the storm had been pure hell. All she wanted was to get inside, call the doctor, and prepare for their daughter's arrival. But when she tried to insert her key into the front door, it wouldn't turn. She tried again, panic rising in her throat. The lock had been changed. "Julian," she called out, pounding on the door with her fist. "Julian, I can't get in. The baby's coming." Through the window, she could see her husband of 3 years look up from his coffee cup. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. There was no concern, no urgency, no love. Just cold indifference. Another contraction hit, this one stronger than the last. Madeline doubled over on the porch, rain soaking through her clothes. She could barely breathe through the pain. "Please," she screamed, beating on the door again. "I'm in labor. Let me in." Dorothy Santino appeared at the window, her thin lips curved into what could barely be called a smile. The 60-year-old woman had hated Madeline from the moment Julian brought her home. She had made that clear through 3 years of passive-aggressive comments, deliberate exclusions from family events, and constant criticism. But this was different. This was evil. Madeline watched in horror as Dorothy said something to Julian, gesturing toward the window where his pregnant wife stood begging in the rain. Julian nodded and took another sip of his coffee. "Dorothy, please?" Madeline pressed her face against the glass. "I know you can hear me. I need to get to the hospital." The older woman approached the window slowly, her gray eyes as cold as winter stones. She placed her hand against the glass directly opposite Madeline's, and spoke loud enough to be heard through the storm. "You made your choice when you disrespected this family," Dorothy said, her voice carrying clearly despite the thunder. "Now live with the consequences." "What are you talking about?" Madeline's voice broke as another wave of pain crashed over her. "I never disrespected anyone. Dorothy, please, the baby. The baby will learn its place just like you should have." Dorothy stepped back from the window, returning to the couch as if nothing was happening. Madeline's legs gave out. She collapsed on the porch, rain streaming down her face mixing with tears she didn't realize she was crying. The contractions were getting closer together now. 6 minutes. Maybe 5. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers trying to call Julian. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same thing. He had blocked her number. Through the pain and shock, a terrible realization began to form. This wasn't some misunderstanding or moment of panic. This was planned. Julian and Dorothy had deliberately changed the locks, knowing she was in labor, knowing she would come home needing help. But why? Another contraction hit and Madeline screamed. She could see neighbors' lights coming on across the street, but the storm was too loud for anyone to hear her over the thunder. She was completely alone, locked out of her own home, while her husband and mother-in-law watched her suffer like some twisted form of entertainment. "Julian," she tried one more time, her voice hoarse from screaming. "This is your daughter. How can you do this to your own child?" For just a moment she saw something flicker across Julian's face. Doubt. Regret? But then Dorothy said something to him, and his expression hardened again. Madeline realized with crystal clarity that the man she had married, the man she had loved, the man whose child she was about to bring into the world, was gone. Maybe he had never existed at all. Maybe this cruel stranger sitting calmly in their living room was who Julian really was, and she had been too blind to see it. The thought should have broken her. Instead, something else began to grow in her chest. Something cold and sharp and infinitely more dangerous than heartbreak. Fury. As another contraction built, Madeline pulled herself to her feet. She walked slowly to her car, never taking her eyes off the window where Julian and Dorothy sat. She wanted them to see her face. She wanted them to remember this moment. Because if they thought leaving her to give birth alone in a thunderstorm would break Madeline Santino, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. The rain pounded harder as she got into her car, but Madeline barely noticed. She was already planning. Already calculating. Already preparing for a war they had just declared. They had locked her out tonight. Soon she would make sure they could never get back in. The last thing she saw before driving away was Dorothy raising her coffee cup in what looked almost like a toast. The woman was celebrating her cruelty, proud of what she had done. Let her celebrate, Madeline thought as another contraction nearly blinded her with pain. Let her think she had won. She had no idea what was coming. Madeline's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, trying to navigate through the storm while contractions tore through her body every 4 minutes. She had driven halfway to the hospital when the pain became too intense to continue safely. She pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, calling out for help as another wave hit. The rain had turned the world into a gray blur, and she could barely see the neon sign through her windshield. She tried to get out of the car to go inside, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. The baby was coming now, whether she was ready or not. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the thunder. She fumbled for her phone, trying to call 911, when she felt something warm running down her legs. Her water had broken. Time became a blur of pain and panic. She managed to call emergency services, gasping out her location between contractions. The dispatcher stayed on the line, trying to guide her through what was happening, but Madeline could barely focus on the words. 15 minutes that felt like hours passed before she saw the red and blue lights cutting through the storm. The paramedics found her in the back seat of her car, holding her newborn daughter against her chest, both of them crying. "Ma'am, you did great," the paramedic said as he wrapped the baby in warm blankets. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "Sophia," Madeline whispered, her voice raw from screaming. "Her name is Sophia." At the hospital, as nurses cleaned and checked both mother and baby, Madeline stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. Sophia was healthy despite everything. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of perfect baby girl who had no idea she had been born in the middle of a war. Dr. Martinez, who had been Madeline's doctor throughout her pregnancy, arrived an hour later. Her face was tight with concern as she examined the chart. "Madeline, why didn't you come in when labor started? The notes say you gave birth in your car during a thunderstorm." Madeline looked down at Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms. How could she explain that her husband had locked her out of their home while she was in labor? That her mother-in-law had watched her beg for help and chosen cruelty instead? "There were complications getting to the hospital," she said finally. Dr. Martinez didn't look satisfied with that answer, but she didn't push. Instead, she did something that surprised Madeline. She sat down in the chair next to the bed. "Honey, I've been delivering babies for 20 years. I've seen every kind of family situation you can imagine. If someone hurt you tonight, if someone kept you from getting the help you needed, you don't have to protect them." Tears started flowing down Madeline's cheeks before she could stop them. She told Dr. Martinez everything. About Dorothy's hatred, about Julian's indifference, about being locked out while in active labor. "That's not just cruel," Dr. Martinez said when Madeline finished. "That's criminal negligence. You and Sophia could have died tonight." "But we didn't," Madeline said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "We survived." Dr. Martinez studied her for a long moment. "Yes, you did. The question is, what are you going to do now?" Before Madeline could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Julian. "Where are you? You never came home last night." Madeline stared at the message in disbelief. He was acting like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't watched his wife collapse on their porch in labor while he sipped coffee inside. Another message came through. "Mom says you probably went to your sister's house to be dramatic. Come home when you're done with your tantrum." The fury that had started building on the porch last night crystallized into something sharp and focused. Madeline deleted both messages without responding. "Nurse," she called to the woman checking her phone. "I need to make some phone calls. Can someone watch Sophia for a few minutes?" The nurse, who had overheard part of the conversation with Dr. Martinez, nodded grimly. "Of course, honey. Take all the time you need." Madeline's first call was to her sister Rachel, who screamed when she heard what had happened and promised to be at the hospital within the hour. Her second call was to her best friend from college, Patricia Chambers, who now happened to be one of the best divorce lawyers in the city. "Madeline? Are you okay? You sound strange." "Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer as my lawyer, not my friend." "Okay, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Madeline told her story again, watching Sophia sleep peacefully while she spoke. Patricia was silent for a long moment when she finished. "Jesus Christ, Madeline. Are you pressing charges?" "I'm thinking about it. But first I need to know about divorce law. If Julian locked me out of our marital home while I was in labor, how does that affect asset division?" "It affects it a lot. especially if we can prove it was intentional and endangered you and the baby. Madeline, with what you're telling me, you could walk away with everything. Good, Madeline said, and she meant it. Because that's exactly what I plan to do. Her third call was to a locksmith. Her fourth was to her bank. By the time Rachel arrived, clutching flowers and a teddy bear, Madeline had a plan. She had also made one more discovery that changed everything. While looking through her phone for Patricia's number, she had accidentally opened Julian's tablet, which was synced to his cloud account. What she found there made her stomach turn. Text messages between Julian and a woman named Rebecca Chin from his office. Months of messages. Pictures. Plans to meet. Declarations of love. The affair had been going on for 8 months. Since Madeline was 3 months pregnant. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a message from Dorothy to Julian from yesterday afternoon. Don't let her back in until she learns respect. Rebecca's coming over tonight anyway. They had planned it. Dorothy had orchestrated the whole thing so Julian could spend the night with his mistress while his wife gave birth alone in a storm. Madeline looked down at Sophia, who was starting to wake up and make soft baby noises. This beautiful, innocent child deserved better than a father who would betray her before she was even born. Rachel, Madeline said as her sister sat down beside the hospital bed. I need you to do me a favor. Anything. I need you to take Sophia home with you for a few days. Just until I get some things sorted out. Rachel looked confused. What about Julian? Doesn't he want to meet his daughter? Madeline's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Julian made his choice last night. Now I'm making mine. The hospital discharged Madeline 2 days later with strict instructions to rest and recover. Instead, she spent the afternoon in Patricia's law office, signing papers and planning her next moves while Sophia slept peacefully in her carrier. The locksmith confirmed that the locks were changed yesterday morning, Patricia said, sliding a report across her desk. That proves premeditation. Julian and Dorothy planned to lock you out. Madeline nodded, studying the bank statements Patricia had printed out. Julian's spending patterns told a story she wished she had seen sooner. Expensive dinners at restaurants she had never been to. Hotel charges on nights when he claimed to be working late. Jewelry purchases that never made it home to her. How long have you suspected? Patricia asked gently. I didn't, Madeline admitted. I thought he was just stressed about becoming a father. He started working late more often, seemed distant, but I blamed myself. I thought maybe I wasn't attractive anymore because of the pregnancy. That's what cheaters count on. They make you question yourself instead of questioning them. Madeline's phone buzzed with another message from Julian. This is ridiculous. Come home now. We need to talk. She showed the message to Patricia, who shook her head. He still thinks he's in control of the situation. He's not, Madeline said quietly. Not anymore. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Madeline, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Divorce is expensive and emotionally draining, especially with a newborn. Some women in your situation try counseling first. Madeline thought about Julian's face in the window as she begged for help. She thought about Dorothy toasting her cruelty. She thought about the text messages with Rebecca, sent while Madeline was carrying his child. He watched me collapse on our porch while I was in labor, she said. He blocked my phone number so I couldn't call for help. He let his mother lock me out of my own home so he could spend the night with another woman. What exactly would we counsel our way through? Patricia nodded approvingly. Good. I needed to hear that you're committed to this path because what we're about to do is going to get ugly. They spent the next hour going over strategy. Patricia had already filed for emergency orders to freeze their joint accounts and prevent Julian from disposing of any marital assets. The locksmith would meet Madeline at the house at 6 p.m. to change all the locks again. What about Dorothy? Madeline asked. She doesn't live there officially, but she's been staying in our guest room for the past 6 months. Legally, she's a guest in your marital home. You have every right to revoke that invitation, especially given what she did. Madeline felt a surge of satisfaction. Dorothy had been making her life miserable for months, criticizing everything from her cooking to her housekeeping to her fitness routine. The woman had even had the audacity to rearrange Madeline's kitchen cabinets and redecorate the nursery without permission. There's something else, Patricia said, pulling out another folder. I had a colleague run a background check on Dorothy Santino. You're going to want to see this. The report revealed that Dorothy had been fired from her last job at an accounting firm for suspected embezzlement. No charges were filed, but she had been quietly let go with a non-disclosure agreement. She's been living off Julian's money for the past 2 years, Patricia explained. According to your bank records, she's been making withdrawals and transfers that Julian probably doesn't even know about. Madeline studied the numbers. Thousands of dollars moving in and out of accounts she had never heard of. Dorothy had been stealing from them while living in their home and making Madeline's life hell. Can we prove it? We're working on it. Financial crimes leave paper trails. My investigator is very good at following money. By 5 p.m., Madeline was parked down the street from her house, watching Julian's car in the driveway. A red sedan she didn't recognize was parked behind it. Rebecca's car, most likely. At exactly 6 p.m., the locksmith arrived. Madeline walked up to her own front door with her marriage certificate and driver's license, proving her legal right to change the locks on her marital home. The sound of the drill brought Julian to the window immediately. His face went white when he saw Madeline standing calmly on the porch, very much not the broken woman he had expected. Madeline. He tried to open the front door, but the locksmith had already removed the old hardware. What are you doing? Exactly what you did to me 3 nights ago, she called back. How does it feel? Julian pounded on the glass. This is insane. You can't lock me out of my own house. Actually, I can. It's my house too, and you forfeited your right to be here when you locked out your pregnant wife. Dorothy appeared behind Julian, her face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little. I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you, Madeline interrupted. Not unless you want to explain to the police why you think watching a woman in labor beg for help is entertainment. A young Asian woman appeared behind Dorothy, looking confused and frightened. Rebecca, presumably. She was pretty in a generic way with long black hair and nervous eyes. Madeline almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Julian, Rebecca said quietly, what's going on? Who is she? Julian's face flushed red. He had clearly not told his mistress that his wife was in labor the night they were together. I'm his wife, Madeline said loudly enough for Rebecca to hear. The one who gave birth to his daughter 3 nights ago while he was busy with you. Rebecca's face went sheet white. She took a step backward, looking between Julian and Madeline with growing horror. The locksmith finished installing the new deadbolt and handed Madeline the keys. All set, ma'am. These are high-security locks. Much better than what was here before. Thank you, Madeline said, pocketing the keys. She turned back to the window where Julian was still pounding on the glass. Oh, and Julian? I froze all our accounts this morning. Enjoy figuring out how to pay for a hotel room. She walked back to her car, leaving Julian screaming her name behind her. As she drove away, she saw Rebecca walking quickly to her own car, apparently wanting no part of whatever was happening. Good, Madeline thought. Let Julian explain this mess to his mistress. Let him try to convince another woman to trust him after she had seen what he was capable of. Her phone rang as she pulled into Rachel's driveway. It was Julian and he was furious. How dare you, he screamed when she answered. You can't lock me out of my own house. You can't freeze our money. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Madeline said calmly. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about how you locked your pregnant wife out of that same house while she was in labor. Patricia has all the evidence ready. Julian was quiet for a moment. Madeline, let's talk about this reasonably. I know you're upset. Upset? Madeline laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. Julian, I'm not upset. I'm done. There's a difference. She hung up and turned off her phone. Inside Rachel's house, Sophia was awake and hungry, completely oblivious to the war being fought over her future. As Madeline fed her daughter, she thought about the woman she had been just a week ago. That woman would have forgiven Julian. Would have believed his excuses. Would have let Dorothy continue her psychological torture. That woman was gone, left behind on a rainy porch 3 nights ago. The woman who had taken her place was going to make sure Julian and Dorothy never forgot what happened when they mistook kindness for weakness. Madeline spent the next morning at Patricia's office, this time accompanied by a private investigator named Robert Hayes. Hayes was a former police detective with 20 years of experience in financial crimes, and he had spent the night going through Dorothy's background. Your mother-in-law is quite the piece of work, Hayes said, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. She's been running financial scams for years, always moving on before anyone catches her. The evidence was damning. Dorothy had embezzled over $200,000 from her previous employer, a small accounting firm that had covered up the theft rather than face the bad publicity of prosecuting a client's grandmother. She's been using Julian's accounts to launder money, Hayes continued. Setting up fake businesses, moving funds through shell companies, all while living in your house and playing the grieving widow. Patricia studied the bank records. Julian's going to be devastated when he finds out. He worships his mother. That's exactly why she targeted him, Hayes said. Adult children of manipulative parents are often the easiest marks. They're already conditioned to ignore red flags and make excuses for behavior they know is wrong. Madeline thought about the past 3 years, remembering all the times Julian had defended his mother's cruelty. How he had explained away her insults as just her way, and blamed Madeline for being too sensitive. She's been grooming him his whole life for this, Madeline realized. Teaching him that women are disposable, that his comfort is more important than anyone else's pain. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca. Can we talk?" Madeline showed the message to Patricia, who raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. What do you want to do?" "Meet with her," Madeline said immediately. "If she's willing to talk, she might have information we can use." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown that afternoon. Rebecca was already there when Madeline arrived, sitting in a corner booth and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said as Madeline sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm curious," Madeline admitted. "What did you want to talk about?" Rebecca took a shaky breath. "I had no idea you were pregnant. Julian told me you were separated, that you were just living in the same house until the divorce was final. He said you were cold and manipulative, that you had trapped him into marriage." Madeline felt a familiar stab of pain, but it was duller now. Almost manageable. "How long were you seeing him?" 8 months. We met at a work conference and he pursued me pretty aggressively. He seemed so unhappy at home, so lonely." Rebecca's voice broke. "I thought I was saving him." "From what?" "From you, apparently. That's what he told me. That you were emotionally abusive, that you controlled all the money, that you had threatened to take everything if he left." Rebecca looked up with tears in her eyes. "I believed him because I wanted to. Because I was falling in love with him." Madeline studied the other woman. Rebecca was younger than her, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest face that suggested she still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. "What changed your mind?" "Seeing you that night. The way you looked at him through the window. You weren't angry or manipulative. You were desperate and terrified and in pain. And he just sat there watching you suffer like it was entertainment." Rebecca wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I tried to convince myself there was some explanation, but then I started paying attention to how he talked about you. How he talked about women in general. He has no empathy, Madeline. None at all." "Did you meet Dorothy?" Rebecca's face darkened. "She's evil. I know that sounds dramatic, but there's something wrong with that woman. She loved that Julian was cheating on you. She encouraged it, planned opportunities for us to be together. She wanted to destroy your marriage." "Why?" "Because she couldn't control you the way she controls Julian. She told me you were too independent and needed to be put in your place. She was proud of what they did to you that night." Madeline felt her anger crystallizing into something harder and colder. "Are you willing to testify about what Dorothy said? About Julian's lies?" "Yes," Rebecca said immediately. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I helped destroy your marriage based on lies, and now you have a baby to protect." They talked for another hour, with Rebecca providing details about Julian's spending, his lies, and Dorothy's manipulation. By the time they parted ways, Madeline had enough evidence to destroy both Julian and his mother in court. That evening, Madeline returned to her house to pack some belongings. The place felt different now, like a stage set for a play she was no longer performing in. She had lived here for 3 years, trying to make it feel like home despite Dorothy's constant interference. Now she could see it clearly. This had never been her home. It had been Dorothy's kingdom, with Julian as her puppet prince and Madeline as the unwanted intruder. She was loading boxes into her car when a police cruiser pulled up. Julian got out of the passenger seat, his face smug with anticipated victory. "Ma'am," the officer said, approaching Madeline. "We've received a complaint that you've illegally locked someone out of their residence." Madeline handed him her driver's license and a copy of her marriage certificate. "This is my marital home, officer. I changed the locks after my husband locked me out while I was in active labor 3 nights ago." The officer's expression changed as he examined her documents. "You live here?" "For 3 years. My name is on the deed and the mortgage." Julian stepped forward. "She's lying. She abandoned the house. She can't just lock me out." "Sir, I'm going to need to see your identification," the officer said. As Julian fumbled for his wallet, Madeline calmly explained what had happened 3 nights ago. She showed the officer the hospital records documenting Sophia's birth, the locksmith's. Report confirming when the original locks had been changed, and Patricia's emergency court orders freezing their assets. Mr. Santino, the officer said when she finished, locking your pregnant wife out of her home during labor could be considered criminal negligence. I suggest you contact a lawyer instead of filing false police reports. Julian's face went purple with rage. This is insane. She's manipulating you just like she manipulates everyone. The officer looked at Julian with barely concealed disgust. Sir, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know the difference between a victim and an abuser. You need to leave now or I'll arrest you for harassment. After Julian left, the officer turned to Madeline. Ma'am, I have to ask, are you somewhere safe? Do you have support? I'm staying with my sister. My daughter and I are fine. Good. If he continues to harass you, don't hesitate to call. What he did to you that night, that's not something any decent man would do. As Madeline finished loading her car, she felt a sense of closure settling over her. The old Madeline would have felt guilty about Julian being homeless, would have worried about his feelings and his comfort. But the old Madeline had died on that porch 3 nights ago. The woman who had taken her place understood that sometimes the only way to protect yourself was to become someone your enemies couldn't destroy. Julian and Dorothy had created their own worst enemy. They just didn't know it yet. Madeline's plan went into motion exactly 1 week after Sophia's birth. She had spent the time gathering evidence, consulting with lawyers, and most importantly, letting Julian and Dorothy believe they were winning. Julian had been calling and texting constantly, alternating between rage and manipulation. His messages followed a predictable pattern: anger at being locked out, demands that she stop being dramatic, promises that things would be different, and finally threats about taking Sophia away. Dorothy's messages were more direct. She called Madeline every name she could think of and promised to make her life hell in the divorce proceedings. What Dorothy didn't know was that every threatening voicemail was being recorded and documented by Patricia's team. The first phase of Madeline's revenge was simple: make them as uncomfortable as possible while she built her case. Julian had been staying at a cheap motel, burning through what little cash he had access to before the accounts were frozen. Dorothy had been staying with Julian's sister Lisa, who had already called Madeline twice to apologize for her mother-in-law's behavior. She's making everyone miserable, Lisa had said during their second conversation. She's got Julian convinced that you're the devil, but honestly, after what she told me about that night, I don't know how either of them can look at themselves in the mirror. What did she tell you? That you deserved it. That you needed to learn respect. Lisa, I have 3 kids of my own. The thought of someone doing that to me while I was in labor makes me physically sick. Lisa's disgust had given Madeline an idea. If Dorothy's own family was turning against her, maybe it was time to accelerate the timeline. On Friday morning, Madeline returned to the house with a moving truck and Patricia's legal team. They had court orders allowing her to remove Dorothy's belongings and change the garage door codes. Dorothy had been staying at the house while Julian was at work, apparently believing that Madeline wouldn't dare confront her directly. She was wrong. What do you think you're doing? Dorothy demanded as the movers began loading her furniture into the truck. Evicting you, Madeline said calmly. You're not on the lease, you're not on the deed, and you're not welcome in my home. This is Julian's house too. Julian can come back when he's ready to have an adult conversation about our marriage. You, however, will never set foot in my house again. Dorothy's face turned an ugly shade of red. You can't do this. I have rights. Patricia stepped forward, holding a folder full of legal documents. Actually, Mrs. Santino, you don't. You're a guest who has overstayed her welcome. These are eviction papers filed this morning. I'll call the police. Go ahead. I'll be happy to show them the evidence of your financial crimes. Dorothy went very still. What are you talking about? Madeline smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Did you really think we wouldn't find out about the embezzlement? About the shell companies? About the money you've been stealing from Julian's accounts? The color drained from Dorothy's face. I don't know what you're talking about. $237,000, Patricia said, reading from her notes. That's how much you've stolen from your son over the past 2 years. We have bank records, transfer receipts, and witness statements from your former employers. Dorothy looked like she might faint. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, Hayes said, appearing from behind the moving truck with a briefcase full of documents. Your digital footprint is extensive, Mrs. Santino. Every transaction, every fake business license, every forged signature. It's all documented. Dorothy's hands started shaking. Julian will never believe you. Julian doesn't have a choice, Madeline said. The evidence speaks for itself. And when he sees how you've been stealing from him while poisoning his marriage, he's going to realize what kind of mother he really has. The movers finished loading Dorothy's belongings, and Patricia handed her a storage unit key. Your things will be at this location. The first month is paid for. After that, it's your responsibility. As Dorothy was driven away by one of Julian's cousins who had come to collect her, Madeline felt the first real satisfaction she had experienced since that terrible night. Dorothy's reign of terror was over. Phase 2 began that afternoon when Julian came home to find the house completely transformed. Gone were Dorothy's gaudy decorations and rearranged furniture. Gone were the pictures of Julian's childhood that Dorothy had insisted on displaying in every room. Gone was every trace of the woman who had made Madeline's life miserable. Julian stood in the living room, looking around at his restored home with confusion and growing anger. "Where is my mother?" he demanded. "Evicted," Madeline said simply. She was sitting in the kitchen, feeding Sophia a bottle while Patricia organized papers at the dining table. "You can't evict my mother." "I just did. She was a guest who overstayed her welcome and committed crimes while living in our home." Julian's face went through several different expressions before settling on rage. "What crimes? What are you talking about?" Patricia slid a folder across the table. "Your mother has been embezzling money from you for 2 years, Julian. She's stolen over $200,000. Julian grabbed the folder and flipped through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Bank statements, forged signatures, fake business licenses, the evidence was overwhelming. "This is impossible," he whispered. "She wouldn't do this to me." "She did do it to you," Madeline said. "While you were defending her cruelty and letting her destroy our marriage, she was robbing you blind." Julian sank into a chair, still staring at the evidence. "But she said she was helping with the finances. She said she was trying to protect our money from you. She was protecting it all right. By moving it into accounts you didn't know about." For the first time since that night on the porch, Julian looked at Madeline with something other than anger or indifference. He looked lost. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why would she do this?" "Because she's a predator," Patricia said bluntly. "She's been using you your entire life, and when she realized Madeline couldn't be controlled the same way, she decided to destroy your marriage rather than lose access to your money." Julian was quiet for a long time, processing the information. Finally, he looked up at Madeline with something that might have been remorse. "I'm sorry," he said. "About everything. About that night, about Rebecca, about not believing you about my mother. I was wrong." Madeline felt nothing. No forgiveness, no satisfaction, no pain. Just a cold, empty space where her love for Julian used to be. "I know you were wrong," she said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" Julian's apology had come too late. The damage was done, and Madeline was no longer interested in salvaging their marriage. But she was interested in justice. "I want a divorce," she continued. "I want full custody of Sophia. And I want you to press charges against your mother for the money she stole. Madeline, please. Can't we try to work this out? Go to counseling or something?" "Julian, you watched me beg for help while I was in labor and did nothing. You blocked my phone so I couldn't call for help. You chose your mother and your mistress over your wife and unborn child. What exactly would we work out?" Julian flinched as if she had slapped him. "I was confused. My mother said." "Your mother said what? That it was acceptable to let a pregnant woman suffer? That adultery was justified? That stealing money was okay as long as it was from your own son? She said you were trying to control me. That you were manipulative and cruel." Madeline laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Julian, I worked full-time while pregnant, took care of our home, and tried to keep peace with a woman who hated me. I never controlled our money, never monitored your activities, never questioned your friendships. The only thing I ever asked for was basic respect and fidelity. If that's controlling, then every woman in America is a dictator." Julian had no answer for that. He sat in silence, looking at the evidence of his mother's crimes and the wreckage of his marriage. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you decide what kind of man you want to be," Madeline said. "You can keep making excuses and blaming everyone else for your choices, or you can face the truth about what you've done and try to make it right." "How do I make it right?" "You start by pressing charges against Dorothy. You cooperate with our divorce proceedings without fighting for assets you don't deserve. And you stay away from Sophia and me until you've figured out how to be a decent human being." Julian looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Madeline's expression stopped him. Perhaps he finally understood that the woman he had married was gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't tolerate his excuses or his mother's manipulation. The Rebecca thing, he said quietly. It's over. It has been since that night. She won't even take my calls. Good for her, Madeline said. She's smarter than I was. As Julian left that evening, Madeline felt a sense of completion. The house was hers again. Dorothy was gone. The truth was finally out in the open. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. Phase 3 was just beginning. The next 2 weeks brought a cascade of revelations that destroyed what was left of Julian's world. The financial investigation Hayes had conducted revealed that Dorothy's crimes went far beyond simple embezzlement. She's been running a sophisticated money laundering operation, Hayes explained to Madeline and Patricia in their morning meeting. Using Julian's legitimate business accounts to clean money from multiple sources. The evidence was staggering. Dorothy had been involved with a network of financial criminals, using her son's consulting firm as a front for washing stolen money. Julian's business clients had no idea their payments were being mixed with proceeds from fraud schemes across 3 states. Julian's going to be investigated too, Patricia warned. The authorities won't believe he knew nothing about this. But he didn't know, Madeline said. He's weak and easily manipulated, but he's not a criminal. We'll have to prove that. And honestly, after what he did to you, I'm not sure why you care if he gets arrested. Madeline thought about that question while feeding Sophia later that morning. Why did she care if Julian went to prison? He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, chosen his mother and his mistress over his wife and child. But despite everything, she didn't want Sophia to grow up visiting her father in prison. The little girl deserved better than that, even if Julian didn't deserve Madeline's protection. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Julian and he sounded panicked. Madeline, the police are here. They want to search my office. They're talking about money laundering and organized crime. I don't understand what's happening. Your mother happened, Madeline said calmly. She's been using your business to launder stolen money. That's impossible. She just helped with bookkeeping. Julian, when was the last time you actually looked at your own financial records? I mean really looked at them, not just signed whatever Dorothy put in front of you. There was a long silence. I trusted her, he said finally. She's my mother. She's a criminal who used your trust to destroy your life. And mine. The investigation moved quickly once federal agents got involved. Dorothy had been sloppy, leaving digital trails that connected her to fraud operations in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia. Her network of accomplices started talking as soon as they were arrested, each one trying to minimize their own involvement. Julian's business was shut down pending investigation. His assets were frozen. His professional reputation was destroyed. Within 2 weeks, he had lost everything except the clothes on his back and a crushing realization of how thoroughly his mother had played him. She planned all of it, he told Madeline when they met at Patricia's office to discuss custody arrangements. The financial crimes, the affair with Rebecca, even locking you out that night. She orchestrated everything to keep control of the money she was stealing. Julian looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His face was gaunt, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and shock. She told me Rebecca was just a friend from work, he continued. She encouraged me to spend time with her, said it was healthy to have female friends. Then she started suggesting I meet Rebecca for drinks, for dinner, for weekend trips. She pushed us together. Why? Because she knew if I was cheating, you'd eventually leave me, and she'd have complete control over my finances. She was already stealing from me, but she needed me isolated from anyone who might notice. Madeline felt a chill of recognition. She wanted me gone from the beginning. She hated you because you asked questions. You wanted to see financial statements, wanted to understand where our money was going. She couldn't risk you discovering what she was doing. The pieces were falling into place now. Dorothy's constant criticism, her attempts to isolate Madeline from Julian's family, her interference in every aspect of their marriage, it had all been calculated to drive Madeline away while maintaining control over Julian. The night I was in labor, Madeline said. That wasn't spontaneous, was it? Julian shook his head, unable to meet her eyes. She planned it. She knew you were having contractions because you called me from Rachel's house. She changed the locks that afternoon and told me it was to teach you respect. She said if you really loved me, you'd apologize for being difficult and we could let you back in. And you believed that. I wanted to believe it. She made it sound reasonable somehow. Like you were testing me to see if I'd choose her over you, and if I failed the test, you'd leave me anyway. Madeline stared at him in disbelief. Julian, I was in labor. I was having your child. How could any of that sound reasonable? Because she's been manipulating me my whole life, Julian said, his voice breaking. She convinced me that women were manipulative, that they used emotions to control men, that I needed to be strong and not give in to emotional blackmail. She made your pain sound like manipulation. The full scope of Dorothy's psychological abuse was becoming clear. She had raised Julian to distrust his own empathy, to see kindness as weakness and cruelty as strength. She had programmed him to be the perfect victim for her financial crimes and the perfect weapon against anyone who threatened her control. What happens now? Julian asked. Patricia answered before Madeline could speak. Now you testify against your mother. You cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You sign over full custody of Sophia to Madeline. And you hope the prosecutors believe you were a victim too. And if they don't? Then you go to prison for crimes your mother committed using your identity and your business. Julian looked at Madeline with desperate eyes. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but will you help me? Will you testify that I didn't know what she was doing? Madeline studied his face. This broken, exhausted man was barely recognizable as the confident husband she had married 3 years ago. Dorothy's manipulation had destroyed him as completely as it had destroyed their marriage. I'll tell the truth, she said finally. That you were a weak man who let his mother control his life and destroy his family, but that you weren't smart enough to be a criminal mastermind. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A recognition that Julian was as much Dorothy's victim as Madeline had been, even if his victimization didn't excuse his choices. The meeting ended with Julian signing custody papers that gave Madeline everything she had asked for. Full custody of Sophia, the house, and most of their remaining assets. Julian would be allowed supervised visits once the criminal investigation was complete, assuming he stayed out of prison. As they left Patricia's office, Julian caught Madeline's arm gently. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. Madeline looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Julian, being sorry isn't enough anymore. Being sorry doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give Sophia back the father she deserved. It doesn't give me back the 3 years I wasted trying to make a marriage work with a man who was never really present. She pulled her arm free. You want to make amends? Be a better person. Stop letting other people control your life. Learn to think for yourself. And maybe someday, when Sophia is old enough to understand, you can have a relationship with your daughter that isn't built on lies and manipulation. As Madeline walked away, she felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of trying to save her marriage, trying to please Dorothy, trying to fix Julian's problems, all of it was gone. She was free. Dorothy Santino's arrest made the local news. Grandmother accused of multi-state financial fraud, read the headline, accompanied by a photo of Dorothy being led away in handcuffs from Julian's sister's house. Madeline was feeding Sophia breakfast when Patricia called with updates from the prosecutor's office. They found over $400,000 in accounts Dorothy controlled, Patricia said. Money from insurance fraud, Medicare scams, and identity theft operations. She's been running cons for decades. What about Julian? He's cooperating fully. The prosecutors believe he was genuinely unaware of his mother's crimes. Turns out Dorothy had been forging his signature on documents for years, and he never bothered to read what he was signing. Madeline shook her head. Julian's willful ignorance of his own business had enabled Dorothy's crimes, but it was also going to save him from prison. There's something else, Patricia continued. Rebecca Chin contacted my office. She wants to provide a statement about Dorothy's role in the affair. They met with Rebecca that afternoon in Patricia's conference room. The young woman looked better than she had at their first meeting, more composed and determined. I've been thinking about everything Dorothy said to me, Rebecca began. All the things she told me about you, about Julian's marriage, about how he needed to be saved from your control. She pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten notes. I wrote down everything I could remember. Every conversation, every suggestion she made, every way she pushed Julian and me together. The picture that emerged was damning. Dorothy had orchestrated the affair from the beginning, identifying Rebecca as a potential threat to Madeline's marriage and carefully manipulating both her and Julian into an emotional connection. She told me you were mentally unstable, Rebecca continued, that you had threatened to hurt yourself if Julian left you. She said the pregnancy was planned to trap Julian, that you had stopped taking birth control without telling him. Madeline felt a familiar surge of anger at Dorothy's lies, but it was manageable now. Distant. She convinced me that I was helping Julian escape from an abusive relationship, Rebecca said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I thought I was being noble, saving him from a manipulative wife. I had no idea I was helping to destroy an innocent family. What changed your mind? Patricia asked. That night. Seeing Madeline on the porch, seeing how Julian and Dorothy just watched her suffer. Whatever problems their marriage had, no decent person would do that to a pregnant woman. It made me realize that everything Dorothy had told me was a lie. Rebecca's testimony would be crucial in establishing Dorothy's pattern of manipulation and control. It proved that the older woman had deliberately destroyed her son's marriage to maintain her financial crimes. After Rebecca left, Madeline and Patricia reviewed the timeline of Dorothy's scheme. It was breathtakingly complex and ruthlessly executed. She targeted Julian when his father died, Patricia explained. Moved in to help with his grief, then gradually took control of his finances while isolating him from anyone who might question her influence. Including me. Especially you. You were the biggest threat to her operation because you were smart, observant, and had legal rights to Julian's assets as his wife. She couldn't steal from him forever with you around asking questions. The affair with Rebecca had been Dorothy's endgame. If she could drive Madeline away through infidelity and emotional abuse, she would have unfettered access to Julian's money until she had taken everything. The night she locked you out was meant to be the final blow, Patricia continued. She expected you to leave Julian after that, probably taking nothing in the divorce because you'd be too broken to fight for your rights. Instead, I got angry. Instead, you got smart. And that destroyed her entire plan. The federal trial was scheduled for the following month, but Dorothy's lawyer was already pushing for a plea deal. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her criminal network was falling apart as co-conspirators turned state's evidence. She's looking at 15 to 20 years, Patricia said. The prosecutors want to make an example of her because she victimized her own family. 15 to 20 years. Dorothy would be in her 80s when she got out of prison, assuming she lived that long. Her reign of terror was finally over. That evening, Madeline was putting Sophia down for the night when her phone rang. It was Lisa, Julian's sister. I had to call you, Lisa said without preamble. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Lisa. Yes, I do. I knew something was wrong with Dorothy, but I never said anything. I was scared of her, and I let that fear hurt you and Julian. Lisa's voice was thick with emotion. She destroyed our family years ago. She turned Julian against me, against our other siblings, against anyone who might have protected him from her. We all saw what she was doing, but we were too afraid to confront her. What do you mean? The financial stuff, the manipulation, the way she controlled every aspect of Julian's life. We knew it wasn't normal, but she was so vicious to anyone who questioned her. She cut people out of Julian's life systematically, and eventually, we all just gave up trying to reach him. Madeline felt a pang of sympathy for Julian's siblings. They had been Dorothy's victims too in their own way. She made us believe that Julian chose her over us, Lisa continued. That he agreed with her assessment that we were jealous, manipulative, trying to interfere in his success. We thought he had become just like her. He did become like her in some ways. Maybe. But not completely. The Julian who used to call me every week, who never missed my kids' birthdays, who cried at our father's funeral, that person was still there underneath Dorothy's programming. She just buried him so deep that he forgot who he was supposed to be. After the call ended, Madeline found herself thinking about the Julian she had first met. The kind, thoughtful man who had brought her flowers on their second date and cried during romantic movies. That man had existed once, before Dorothy's psychological warfare had twisted him into someone who could watch his wife suffer without feeling empathy. It didn't excuse what Julian had done. It didn't repair the damage to their marriage or restore Madeline's trust. But it helped her understand how they had gotten to that terrible night on the porch. Dorothy hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen souls. Julian's soul, Rebecca's innocence, the trust between family members, the foundation of a marriage. But she hadn't stolen Madeline's strength. And now that strength was going to ensure Dorothy paid for every life she had destroyed. The preliminary hearing for Dorothy's case brought together an unlikely group of her victims. Julian's siblings had all driven in from different states to provide testimony about their mother's decades of manipulation and financial abuse. Madeline arrived at the courthouse with Sophia in her carrier, surprised to find Rebecca waiting in the hallway with Julian's sister Lisa and two people she didn't recognize. Madeline, Lisa said, standing up as she approached. I want you to meet my brother Paul and sister Carmen. They've been estranged from Julian for years because of Dorothy. Paul was older than Julian, with graying hair and tired eyes. Carmen was younger, a successful lawyer from California who had flown in specifically for the hearing. We've been trying to reach Julian for 3 years, Carmen said. Dorothy told him we were jealous of his success and trying to manipulate him into giving us money. She told him we were bad influences, Paul added. That we were trying to turn him against her because we resented how close they were. Madeline looked around at Julian's siblings, seeing the pain and frustration in their faces. Dorothy had systematically destroyed their family relationships to maintain control over Julian. Where is Julian now? Carmen asked. Probably at home, preparing for his testimony, Madeline said. He's cooperating with the prosecution. Is he okay? Lisa asked hesitantly. I mean mentally? Emotionally? Finding out that your mother has been manipulating and stealing from you your entire life can't be easy. Madeline considered the question. She had seen Julian several times over the past month for custody meetings and legal proceedings. He looked broken, hollowed out, like someone recovering from a serious illness. He's processing, she said finally. Coming to terms with who his mother really is. It's not easy for him. Rebecca, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. He called me last week to apologize. He said he understood now how Dorothy manipulated both of us, and he wanted me to know that he didn't blame me for ending things. How are you doing with all this? Carmen asked Rebecca gently. Better. Therapy helps. And knowing that I'm not the only one Dorothy fooled makes me feel less stupid. Rebecca looked at Madeline. I keep thinking about how different things might have been if I had trusted my instincts instead of listening to her lies. You can't change the past, Madeline said. You can only learn from it. The hearing itself was brief but damning. The prosecutor laid out the scope of Dorothy's crimes in stark detail. $400,000 stolen from Julian, participation in multiple fraud schemes, money laundering operations spanning 3 states. Julian's testimony was the most difficult to watch. He sat in the witness chair looking like a man who had aged decades in months, answering questions about his mother's manipulation with quiet, broken honesty. She told me that questioning her was disrespectful, he said when asked why he had never reviewed his own financial records. That good sons trusted their mothers. That successful men delegated financial management to people they could rely on. Did you ever suspect she was stealing from you? The prosecutor asked. No. She always had explanations for where the money went. Business expenses, investments, emergency funds for family members. She made it sound like she was protecting our assets, not stealing them. What about your wife's concerns about the family finances? Julian's voice broke slightly. Dorothy told me that Madeline was trying to control me through money. That she was suspicious and manipulative, and I needed to keep her away from our financial decisions or she would try to take everything in a divorce. Madeline felt no satisfaction watching Julian's pain. There was no victory in seeing a broken man confront the destruction of everything he had believed about his life. Dorothy's defense attorney tried to paint her as a grieving widow who had made some poor financial decisions, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The prosecution had recordings of her discussing fraud schemes, documents showing systematic theft over multiple years, and testimony from victims across 3 states. When Dorothy finally took the stand in her own defense, she showed no remorse. Instead, she blamed everyone else for her crimes. Julian was ungrateful for questioning her. Madeline was manipulative for investigating the finances. Rebecca was a homewrecker who had seduced her innocent son. I did everything for my family, Dorothy said, her voice cold and defiant. Everything I did was to protect Julian from people who wanted to use him. Including stealing over $400,000 from him? The prosecutor asked. I was investing his money, making it grow, planning for his future. In accounts he didn't know about, using businesses that didn't exist? Dorothy's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating criminal underneath. Julian doesn't understand financial management. He needed someone to make smart decisions for him. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Dorothy showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but Madeline saw something in her eyes that looked almost like satisfaction. Even facing decades in prison, the woman seemed pleased that she had caused so much pain. Outside the courthouse, Julian's siblings surrounded him with the kind of family support he hadn't experienced in years. They were talking quietly, making plans to help him rebuild his life and his relationships. Madeline, Julian called as she was loading Sophia into her car. Can I talk to you for a minute? She waited while he approached, noting how different he looked from the man she had married. Thinner, grayer, but somehow more present. More real. I want you to know that I'm getting help, he said. Therapy, support groups for people who've been manipulated by family members. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could do what I did to you. That's good, Julian. You need to understand yourself before you can be any kind of father to Sophia. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but someday when I figured out how to be a better person, would you consider letting me have a relationship with our daughter? Madeline looked down at Sophia, who was sleeping peacefully in her car seat. The little girl deserved a father who could love her without conditions, who wouldn't choose his own comfort over her well-being. Prove to me that you've changed, she said. Show me that you can make decisions based on what's right instead of what's easy. Show me that you can stand up to people who try to manipulate you. Show me that you can put Sophia's needs above your own. How long do I have? As long as it takes. She's not going anywhere, Julian. But I won't let you hurt her the way you hurt me. Julian nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. As Madeline drove away, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for her marriage, which was irreparably broken, but for Julian's potential to become the kind of man Sophia deserved as a father. Dorothy was going to prison. Julian was getting help. The truth was finally out in the open. For the first time since that terrible night on the porch, Madeline felt like she could truly move forward. Dorothy Santino was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison on a cold Tuesday morning in February. Madeline attended the sentencing hearing with Sophia, who had just started smiling and seemed oblivious to the gravity of the proceedings around her. The judge was thorough in her condemnation of Dorothy's crimes, noting the particular cruelty of victimizing her own family members. Mrs. Santino, you systematically destroyed your son's life and marriage for financial gain, Judge Harrison said. You manipulated a young woman into an affair that devastated an innocent family. You locked your pregnant daughter-in-law out of her home during active labor, endangering both mother and child. Dorothy sat motionless at the defense table, showing no emotion as her crimes were catalogued. Most disturbing of all, the judge continued, you show no remorse for your actions. Even now, you blame your victims for the consequences of your choices. This court has rarely seen such calculated cruelty disguised as maternal love. The 18-year sentence was longer than even the prosecutors had requested. At Dorothy's age, it was essentially a life sentence. Do you have anything to say before this court? Judge Harrison asked. Dorothy stood slowly, her gray hair perfectly styled even for her sentencing. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. I regret nothing, she said. I protected my son from people who wanted to use him. If that makes me a criminal, so be it. Even facing decades in prison, Dorothy couldn't admit she was wrong. She truly believed her own lies about protecting Julian, about Madeline being manipulative, about Rebecca being a seductress. The bailiff led Dorothy away in handcuffs, and Madeline felt a profound sense of closure. The woman who had terrorized her family was gone, and she would never hurt anyone again. Outside the courthouse, Julian was waiting with his siblings. He had been attending therapy regularly and looked healthier than he had in months. Is it over? He asked quietly. It's over, Madeline confirmed. She got 18 years. Julian nodded, his face a mixture of grief and relief. Watching your mother go to prison was traumatic even when she deserved it. Julian, Carmen said, putting her hand on her brother's shoulder. We're having dinner tonight to talk about rebuilding our family relationships. Will you come? For a moment, Julian looked uncertain, as if he was still waiting for Dorothy's permission to make decisions. Then something shifted in his expression and he nodded. I'd like that, he said. I've missed you all. It was a small moment but significant. Julian was finally learning to think for himself, to make choices based on his own feelings rather than someone else's manipulation. Later that afternoon, Madeline received a call from Hayes, the private investigator. We recovered about 60% of the money Dorothy stole, he said. Some of it was already spent, but most was sitting in accounts she controlled. The court ordered full restitution. The money would help Julian rebuild his business and his life. More importantly, it represented justice. Dorothy's crimes had consequences, and her victims were being made whole as much as possible. There's something else, Hayes continued. Some of Dorothy's criminal associates are providing information about other victims. Apparently, she's been running variations of this scam for decades. Other families, other sons she manipulated and stole from. Madeline wasn't surprised. Dorothy's manipulation of Julian had been too sophisticated, too practiced to be her first attempt. There were probably other broken families scattered across the country, other women who had been driven away from their husbands by Dorothy's lies. Will they get justice too? The FBI is opening investigations based on the information. It's going to take time, but yes, Dorothy's other victims will get their day in court. As Madeline hung up the phone, she felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with revenge. Dorothy's arrest hadn't just protected Sophia and Julian from future manipulation. It had potentially saved other families from the same destruction. That evening, Patricia came over to celebrate with Chinese takeout and champagne. They sat in Madeline's living room while Sophia played on her blanket, finally able to relax after months of legal battles. "So what's next?" Patricia asked. "You're free, you're financially secure, you have full custody of Sophia. The world is your oyster." Madeline considered the question. For so long, her life had been consumed by survival, by protecting herself and her daughter from Julian and Dorothy's dysfunction. Now, for the first time in months, she could think about the future instead of just getting through each day. "I want to go back to school," she said. "Get my master's degree in counseling. Help other women who are dealing with manipulative in-laws or abusive family situations." "That's perfect for you. You have the experience and the strength to help people navigate those situations." "I also want Sophia to know her father if he can prove he's changed. She deserves the chance to have a healthy relationship with him." Patricia nodded approvingly. "You're being remarkably generous considering what he put you through." "I'm not doing it for Julian. I'm doing it for Sophia. Every child deserves parents who can love them without conditions." As Patricia left that night, Madeline stood in her doorway holding Sophia, looking out at the quiet street. The house felt different now, truly hers for the first time. Dorothy's toxic presence was gone, Julian's betrayal was behind her, and the future stretched ahead full of possibilities. Sophia babbled happily in her arms, reaching for the porch light with chubby fingers. She was growing so fast, becoming more alert and interactive every day. Soon she would be crawling, then walking, then talking. Madeline wanted Sophia to grow up knowing that women could be strong, that they didn't have to tolerate abuse or manipulation, that they could build beautiful lives even after terrible betrayals. She wanted her daughter to know that sometimes the only way to protect yourself was to become someone your enemies couldn't destroy. But most of all, she wanted Sophia to know that she was loved completely and unconditionally, that her mother would always choose her well-being over anyone else's comfort. As Madeline closed the door and locked it behind her, she smiled. The locks had been changed so many times over the past few months, but now they were finally keeping out the right people. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build the life she and Sophia deserved. Tonight they were safe, they were free, and they were home. 6 months after Dorothy's sentencing, Madeline was pushing Sophia's stroller through Riverside Park when she spotted a familiar figure on a bench nearby. Julian was reading a book, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in years. Sophia, now 8 months old and fascinated by everything around her, pointed at her father and made excited babbling sounds. Despite everything that had happened, she seemed drawn to Julian during their supervised visits. "Madeline," Julian said, standing up as she approached. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Sophia loves the ducks," Madeline said, parking the stroller near his bench. "We come here most afternoons." Julian had been attending his court-mandated therapy sessions religiously and had completed a program for people recovering from psychological manipulation. The supervised visits with Sophia had been going well, with Julian showing genuine care and attention for his daughter. "How are your sessions with Dr. Reynolds going?" Madeline asked, sitting down on the opposite end of the bench. "Hard," Julian admitted. "She's helping me understand how my mother programmed me to distrust my own instincts. Did you know I used to be close to my siblings before Dorothy convinced me they were jealous of my success? I remember you mentioning Paul and Carmen early in our marriage. Then you stopped talking about them. Dorothy told me they were trying to turn me against her, that they resented how successful I was becoming and wanted to drag me down." Julian's voice was filled with regret. "I chose her lies over relationships with people who actually loved me." Sophia reached for Julian, and after checking with Madeline, he lifted his daughter out of the stroller. She immediately grabbed his glasses and tried to put them in her mouth, making him laugh. "She's getting so big," he said softly. "I missed so much of her early development." "You missed it because you chose to miss it," Madeline said, but her voice wasn't cruel, just factual. "I know. Dr. Reynolds helped me understand that I can't blame all my choices on my mother's manipulation. Yes, she programmed me to distrust empathy and see kindness as weakness. But I was an adult. I should have questioned her influence, especially when it came to hurting you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Sophia explore Julian's face with her tiny hands. Despite everything, there was something peaceful about this moment. No anger, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just two parents sharing time with their daughter. "I started my master's program last week," Madeline said eventually. Patricia mentioned that. Counseling, right? That's perfect for you. I want to help other women who are dealing with manipulative family members. There are so many stories like ours, Julian. Women who get blamed for their husband's mother's behavior, who get isolated and gaslit until they don't trust their own reality. Julian was quiet for a moment. Will you tell them that the husbands can change? That some of us are victims too in our own way? Madeline considered the question carefully. I'll tell them that change is possible, but that it requires the person to do the work. To face uncomfortable truths about themselves and take responsibility for their choices. Not everyone is willing to do that. But I am, Julian said, looking directly at her. I'm doing the work. I'm learning to think for myself, to question people who claim to know what's best for me, to trust my own instincts instead of letting others make my decisions. I can see that, Madeline said. You're different than you were 6 months ago. Different enough to be Sophia's father? You're her father regardless. The question is whether you can be a good father. Someone who puts her needs first, who protects her from people who might try to manipulate or hurt her, who teaches her to trust her own strength. Julian nodded seriously. I want to be that for her. I want to be the kind of father who would never let anyone hurt his daughter, no matter who they are or what they claim about love and family. As they prepared to leave the park, a young man with kind eyes and a warm smile approached their bench. He was carrying a bag of duck food and looked slightly embarrassed. Excuse me, he said to Madeline. I don't mean to interrupt, but I've seen you here with your daughter several times. I'm Nathan Torres. I teach kindergarten at the elementary school across the street. The kids love watching the ducks during recess. Madeline felt herself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. I'm Madeline. This is Sophia, and this is her father Julian. Nathan's smile was warm and uncomplicated. Sophia's beautiful. How old is she? 8 months, Madeline said. And completely fascinated by water birds, apparently. Most kids are. There's something magical about ducks to a child's mind. Nathan looked at Julian. Do you mind if I give Sophia some bread to throw? The ducks are very gentle. Julian handed Sophia back to Madeline, recognizing that this moment wasn't about him. That sounds great. She loves new experiences. As Nathan showed Sophia how to throw small pieces of bread to the eager ducks, Madeline found herself watching his easy manner with children, his genuine kindness, his complete lack of agenda or manipulation. You're very good with kids, she said. 5 years of kindergarten will do that to you. They're honest about everything. If they like you, they like you. If they don't, they let you know immediately. It's refreshing after dealing with adults all day. Julian cleared his throat. I should go. I have an appointment with Dr. Reynolds in an hour. He kissed Sophia's forehead gently. I'll see you this weekend for our visit, little one. As Julian walked away, Nathan looked at Madeline with understanding eyes. Recent divorce? Very recent. And very complicated. Most divorces are, especially when there are children involved. For what it's worth, you seem like you're handling it with a lot of grace. Madeline felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Not love, it was far too early for that, but possibility. The sense that maybe someday she could trust someone again. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Nathan asked. Just coffee. No pressure, no expectations. Sometimes it's nice to talk to another adult who doesn't require emotional analysis. Madeline looked down at Sophia, who was clapping her hands as the ducks swam closer to shore. Her daughter deserved to see her mother happy, to grow up in a home filled with laughter instead of tension. I'd like that, she said. But I should warn you, I come with a lot of baggage. Recent betrayal, trust issues, a very protective mindset when it comes to my daughter. Nathan's smile never wavered. We all have baggage, Madeline. The question is whether we're willing to work on unpacking it with the right person. They exchanged phone numbers, and Nathan helped Madeline load Sophia back into her stroller. As he walked back toward his school, Madeline felt something she hadn't experienced since before her marriage fell apart. Hope. Not for romance necessarily, though Nathan seemed like a genuinely kind man. But hope for the future. Hope that she could build a life filled with people who valued honesty over manipulation, kindness over control, love over power. That evening, as Madeline was giving Sophia her bath, her phone rang. It was Patricia with news about the appeals process for Dorothy's case. She's not appealing, Patricia said. Her lawyer says she's accepted the sentence and wants to serve her time quietly. Really? I expected her to fight it. Apparently, prison life isn't agreeing with her. She's discovered that her manipulation tactics don't work on other inmates, and the guards don't care about her sob stories. She's probably hoping that good behavior will get her sentence reduced. Madeline felt a grim satisfaction. Dorothy was finally experiencing consequences she couldn't manipulate her way out of. There's something else, Patricia continued. Julian called me today. He wants to modify the custody agreement to give you even more decision-making power. He says he doesn't trust himself to make good choices for Sophia yet, and he wants you to have legal authority to protect her from anyone who might try to manipulate him. That surprised Madeline. Julian was voluntarily giving up parental rights to ensure Sophia's protection. It was the kind of selfless decision the old Julian never would have made. He's really changing, she said. People can change, Madeline. It's rare and it's hard, but it's possible. The question is whether you believe the change is real and lasting. As Madeline tucked Sophia into her crib that night, she thought about the conversation with Patricia. Julian was doing the work to become a better person, but that didn't erase the damage he had caused. It didn't restore her trust or repair their marriage. But it did give her hope that Sophia might have a father worth knowing someday. She looked around the nursery, remembering how Dorothy had redecorated it without permission, choosing colors and themes that Madeline hated. Now it was exactly as Madeline had envisioned it, soft and welcoming, filled with books and toys that encouraged learning and imagination. This was Sophia's room. This was their home. This was the life they had built from the ashes of betrayal and manipulation. Dorothy was in prison. Julian was learning to be human again. Rebecca had moved to another city and was building a healthy relationship with someone who valued honesty. And Madeline was finally free to become the woman she was meant to be. Strong enough to protect her daughter, wise enough to recognize genuine kindness, brave enough to risk trusting again when the right person proved themselves worthy. As she turned off the nursery light, Madeline smiled. Tomorrow Nathan would call and they would make plans for coffee. Julian would continue his therapy and his slow journey toward redemption. Sophia would grow and learn and become her own person. The woman who had begged for help on a rainy porch 9 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who would never again mistake cruelty for love or manipulation for care. That woman had been broken by betrayal. This woman had been forged by fire. And she was just getting started.